software. A lot of the code that is running my computer right now and a lot of the code that is running your computer right now is written by Novell. Surely that's something that we should be very conscious of in this debate.
Yeah, it's always been a complicated issue, and we did try to explain that the component of Novell's is a company that has management, and the component which is the engineers. And you have to remember, Novell only has a few hundreds of engineers working on Linux, right? Novell has almost 4,000 employees at the moment. So the vast majority of the people don't actually do this code, and they actually do try to sell what they call, solutions to customers.
So you must have the same objection. You must have the same objection to IBM then, and to Dell.
Well, I think one of the demonizations would rely on the fact that we try to kind of attack the developers themselves, which isn't the case. And the developers themselves don't actually have much impact and don't really have much influence inside the company's direction when it comes to the company's policies and so on.
I think Miguel de Casa would disagree with that point, though. I mean, if you're saying that you don't attack developers, I mean, I saw a story on the Boycott Novell website yesterday. Well, he's a developer. I mean, he's the co-founder of the. Sure, yeah. But he's the co-founder of the GNOME project, and he's the lead developer and project manager of the Mono project. And there was a photo on the Boycott Novell site of him, and you'd gimped in a Windows box to make it look like he was holding a Windows box. That sounds like an attack to me.
Well, if you look at certain things he's done recently, for example, he joined the Microsoft Codeplex Foundation, for instance. This is an example where the person he is actually helping on Linux on the one hand, or at least trying to help him, and he has a proven history of actually helping free software. But at the same time, he's trying to bring this sort of what Pamela Jones would call fusion with Microsoft. Now, Microsoft is not really interested in Linux succeeding. It's very obvious that they want to advance their own financial agenda. If they can sell, if they can extract tax out of SUSE sales, that's fine for them. It's not very fine for the customers. But if he's interested in advancing their agenda, as long as their agenda is obviously to spread their software with lots of malicious features and lots of hostility towards competitors, and this is something you can look at it. If you look at history, just the past 10 years, you'll find that Microsoft is not a very competitor. So if you help this kind of company, and it continues to show you that it actually is suing Linux companies at the same time that it's pretending to be helpful and tolerant and so on, then you don't necessarily help the Linux cause in general. You don't actually advance it very much.
But surely what's happening with the fact that Novell has hired some of the greatest and the best in the upstream software development world is, that's good for open source. I mean, they've brought code. I mean, they've brought real, actual code that is licensed under a free software license to our machines. They've invested real money into producing free software. And they've made some mistakes, and in the same way that it seems like the disappointment I have about this is that the impression I get is that your intentions here, Roy, are absolutely admirable. I believe that at heart you believe that you're doing the right thing, and you believe that you're protecting the rights and the privileges that we have in the free software community. But what disappoints me is that Miguel's working on Mono, but he also works he has worked on GNOME and done a huge amount of work on GNOME, and we've got some great free software that's being produced using Mono, and if people don't like it, they can just uninstall it. Surely, maybe we need to get to a point where we can just agree to disagree. I mean, is it really as bad as you're making out? Is it really that bad?
I think you're steering towards the issues that are more convenient for you to talk about. So if you try to just present one side of the story and actually stick to certain facts which are substantive, well, if you want to say that Novell contributes in terms of patches, in terms of code, and so on, that's very obvious, but that's just one side of the story. So although you're asking me the questions, I suppose I could ask certain questions myself and try to present the other side of the story.
So what do you feel I should be focused on? What do you feel like I'm missing out on when I'm responding to you?
One thing you could actually look at is how the products are being marketed at the expense of other companies. You could be looking at things like what Novell is doing to virtualization and how it's affecting other companies that compete against Microsoft. You could be looking at things like how Novell actually ushers Microsoft into the free software community. Which may sound like a very beneficial thing, but in reality, Microsoft actually exploits that to advance its own interests. It's not a charity. It's actually trying to advance its own agenda at the expense of the competitors. And
why can't Microsoft be a member of the free software community?
Well, it goes a long way back.
I don't believe there's a statement in the GPL that says everyone's welcome to write code apart from Microsoft. I mean, surely it's so long as we work within the expectations of how our community works, it's we're welcome to everybody.
Well, if you look at the history of things, it's not as simple as you put it. So you could actually be talking about a company like Oracle submitting code for the Linux kernel, and that's acceptable. That's fine, and because Oracle doesn't actually compete against the Linux kernel at the same time. Okay, so Microsoft actually tries to impose upon the competitor certain compatibility with its own products, something which is going to advance sales of its own products at the expense of the very same product.
Right, so what you're saying is that Microsoft's involvement is merely to sell more Microsoft products?
By definition, it's a company, and that's what it's supposed to.
And do you think that's a bad thing? I mean, it is a company, it's there to make money. I mean,
every company is doing that. IBM is doing that, HP is doing that, but they do it because they want to advance Linux, okay? And when Microsoft is doing that, it's because it wants to put Linux under Windows, okay? So it actually wants to sell the opposite product.
I'd say that's where we disagree. The reason why IBM is doing that is because they want to sell servers. The reason why Dell are doing that is because they want to sell laptops. The reason why Microsoft's doing it is because they want to sell Windows, but that's because they're a company. I mean, is your objection the fact that kind of like the ethos why Microsoft is involved is wrong? It's incorrect. It's they're handing us something that they're gonna do you believe that they're essentially giving us a poisoned apple? Is that the reason why you're objecting against them?
Well, it's not very possible to reject these patches. Obviously, you do try to actually just for a bit of a background information. I suppose I should say that we're talking about the Hyper-V patches that they put into Linux with Novell's help, and that was part of the deal that they had with Novell. Apparently some GPL violation involved there, so they kind of had to make it available to everyone else. But in the case of Microsoft, if you simply look at the interest, if you actually look at the interest and how they're very much the opposite of the interest of Linux, because it's a zero-sum game. If Linux loses, usually it's going to be Microsoft that gains, at least on the servers. Assuming that Unix is pretty much staying static.
How will Microsoft give me a specific example of how Microsoft are mixing interests, so I've got something to work from?
They don't really have mixed interest in this case. In the case when they actually put patches in Linux, it's really just beneficial to Windows. It's not really beneficial to Linux.
Well, does it matter? I mean, put it this way: if someone writes a patch that makes some obscure webcam that I don't own work, I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's a great thing. I mean, if Windows can work really great with Windows, surely that's a great thing for adoption.
No, you look at it. Well, it's a very bad analogy, because when you're talking about a driver, you're talking about something that works under Windows. Now, the patch they actually produced actually helps Linux run under.
Yeah, it helps it run in a virtualized environment, right?
Yeah.
And from what I understand from when I was an open source consultant, pretty much the way people got started using Linux was by running it in a virtualized environment.
Sure, and they also have products except Hyper-V, which aren't going to be as discriminatory against the Linuxes which are free. One of the intentions of this patch